In this episode, I am joined by Kristina and Sam Von Trapp. Yes, those Von Trapps, the legendary family whose story captured hearts worldwide in The Sound of Music. Their family's tale of escape from Austria, their musical success, and eventual settlement in the United States, specifically Stowe, Vermont, has become a beloved part of our popular culture. But today, we are getting a personal glimpse into their world and discovering what it is like to carry on the legacy. Kristina and Sam are not only the faces behind the renowned Trapp Family Lodge, but they also embody the spirit and traditions of their storied family. From their role in the lodge's daily operations, which is way more hands-on than most people would think, to their involvement in the growing enterprises, they have many unique experiences to share. This was a delightful conversation, so fascinating, and I'm so eager for you to listen to it. Welcome to Grandma's Silver, where tradition meets today. I'm Allie, your host and the founder of the Grand Millennial Lifestyle. Here, we blend aesthetics with nostalgia, engaging in conversations with lifestyle brands, designers, and more to rediscover the timeless charm of the past. Join me as we journey from home to heart, illuminating the past and polishing the present with the gleam of Grandma's Silver. I'm very excited to sit down and chat with you both, Kristina and Sam. We are going to talk all things Trapp Family Lodge. But of course, before we get into that, I want to give you each the opportunity to kind of tell folks who you are, what your roles at the lodge are. And then before we really dive into the lodge itself, I think it's important to assume that maybe not all listeners are super familiar with the family history, although I'm sure many are. So if someone or both kind of want to chime in with a little bit of your family's story and how you got to Vermont.
I will talk about how Sam and I fit into the family. Our father is Johannes von Trapp. He is the youngest of the three children that Maria and the captain had together. So in the Sound of Music movie, you see that Maria joins the family, and then in the movie, they flee right away. In real life, Maria and the captain got married in 1927, and they didn't flee Austria until 1938. So two daughters were born in Austria, and she was pregnant with our father, Johannes, when they came over by boat in 1938. And so Maria is our grandmother.
And we grew up, so I'm Sam Von Trapp, younger brother of Kristina, and we grew up right here on the grounds of the Trapp Family Lodge. So when our family came over from Austria in 1938, they came over as refugees. They were professional singers. They had a concert tour already scheduled in the US. So even though they arrived practically penniless, I was always told that they had $3.50 among 12 of them when they arrived. But the family did get going quickly giving concert tours. And eventually they moved out, lived in Lower Merion, Pennsylvania, where a gentleman was generous enough to allow them to stay in a second home that he owned, and then came up to Stowe in the summer of 1942 and fell in love with this environment. It reminded them of Austria in terms of the topography, the mountains, the trees, and the people reminded them of Austrians as far as the hardworking, self-reliant, independent nature of the Vermont farmers and the Austrian mountain farmers. And this was a place that they could make home.
They just also knew that there was always value in land. And so they just felt really they knew they wanted to buy a farm. They actually had put down a down payment on a farm in southern Vermont, but then when they saw this property in Stowe, Vermont, they let that deposit go and bought the property on the hillside where we are now. Like Sam said, it was the topography, it was the people, hardworking, connected to the land. And next year in 2025 will be our 75th anniversary of family-owned hotel and resort.
Wow. You mentioned, of course, The Sound of Music and the connection it has to your family, but also the real versus perhaps the creative liberties that were taken. What involvement? I mean, I know but most are familiar with the film. I don't know that everybody knows there was a musical that preceded that in the 50s. What was not necessarily what was real, what was fake, but how involved were they in helping to shape the reality of what was portrayed?
So the way it started, as far as how The Sound of Music came to be, the family had a reputation as professional singers, so they had a following. at one day giving a concert, they were a little bit late getting ready to perform. So our grandmother, Maria, went out on stage, started telling stories to the audience in order to buy time for the rest of the family to get ready to perform. It happened to be there was a book publisher in the audience that day. He came up to her after the show, gave her his card, said, "Hey, if you can tell stories like that, you could certainly write a book." So she went on to write the story of the Trapp Family Singers, which started, it's basically the same time frame as the movie, with her leaving the Nürnberg Abbey and going to live at the Villa Trapp. But her book actually went through 1947. So it went through the early years here in United States, and it went through the early years up here in Vermont, and the death of our grandfather in 1947. That book was then made into 2 German movies. Our grandmother did not have good representation when she sold the rights to that book, so she sold it for $9,000 cash and had no claim to any future revenues. She was misled by representatives of the German company who told her that foreigners were not allowed to receive royalties under German law. So she really had zero input on it. And during the filming, she was in Salzburg for a little bit of the filming, and she actually has a cameo where she walks through in the background. But just way in the background, no speaking or anything. Really, she was pretty much sort of kept away from it so that they could create the work of art that they wanted to create without someone saying, no, it didn't happen like that.
So yes, the Sound of Music movie and the play, Rodgers and Hammerstein, and the music is incredible. Some people take the Sound of Music movie as documentary, whereas what Sam said is really true, that they created their own mystique and storyline a little bit also. So I tend to call the movie my sci-fi parallel universe family, because the kids had different names than the real children in real life.
Right.
They did keep Maria and Georg's name correct, but the kids had different names. The movie was filmed in different locations. So it's the back of one beautiful palace and it's the front of a different palace for the movie. And how they escaped was different also. But, it's an amazing story of hope and joy and love that brings a lot of happiness to people these days. Still these days,
It does. Yeah. I mean, it truly is. Honestly, not only is your family is such an important part of popular culture, but I think the story has such an incredible legacy that is really tied, I think, to the lodge, because it is part of that story. And it's really neat to see the 2 of you and the family in general carrying that forward. If we go back to talking just briefly about the success of your family from largely music, but then also because of the notoriety that came with the connection, I think, to the Sound of Music and all of that. What was that experience? I mean, I guess you really didn't know anything different, right? But what was that like for you to grow up with and to have the Von Trapp name?
It's interesting because, and we can talk, I think, about our experience, but just because you went back to sort of the different stages, and our father put it really well at one point. Our father is Johannes, the youngest child of Maria and the Baron. He said once, originally our family was known in Austria because our grandfather was a highly decorated submarine captain, war hero in World War I. Then the family was known for their music in Austria. Then they were known for their music around the United States and around the world. And then, the German movie didn't really, I don't think, really got much beyond Germany and Austria and German-speaking countries. So that didn't change it significantly. But then when the American stage play came out, and then the movie, that was sort of the final step. All of a sudden, it was sort of out there to everyone. So there were many different steps. We sort of joke the family losing its privacy sort of more and more with each step as more and more people knew of the family. And then with the Sound of Music, really did become a household name for to many people. And our grandmother did become quite a famous character, would travel around, gave a lot of speeches. We meet a lot of people. Oh, your grandmother spoke at my church. Your grandmother spoke at my college, at my high school. So she really did do these whirlwind tours. But to us, we just grew up like, wow, we just met another person who's seen that movie because we didn't have television in our home. We hadn't seen the movie.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Yeah, we grew up with no TV. It would come out for the Olympics or for Mary Poppins. So in our household, Julie Andrews was Mary Poppins.
Yeah. We didn't know that there was anything different about our family versus anybody else in the resort town that we live in here. When we were growing up, all the hotels were family owned and operated. So it wasn't necessarily glamorous to own a hotel. It just meant that you worked 24/7. You think of anybody that you went through elementary school and high school with, we were just one of those kids sitting next to you in class. We worked hard our whole lives growing up, and everybody else does around here as well. And so when I started going away to school and I would introduce myself, like your parents teach you to, with your first and last name, I would say, "Hi, my name is Kristina von Trapp." People would say, "What? What's your name? Are you from The Sound of Music? Is it real? Are you real?" And that was really overwhelming. So I very quickly learned to just offer my first name. "Hi, my name is Kristina." It's already 3 syllables, so then people can remember that. And then later on in the conversation, if I like them, I could add that my last name is von Trapp, because it makes people really happy to learn about it. But for me, it's nice when it's not the first thing that they learn about me, because it just takes the conversation in a completely different angle.
I think Kristina too, it's funny, but Kristina's actual first name initially was Maria. She was Maria Kristina von Trapp. She only ever went by Kristina. But when she got to a new classroom and the teacher would take roll, it wasn't Kristina, it was Maria von Trapp. So you can imagine how the heads would spin around. I never had to deal with that.
Well, and I'm sure that's tough because, right, like there is that preconceived attachment or preconceived notion to the last name. When people were recognizing the name, must have been kind of a surreal experience.
Oh, daily.
Yeah.
It still happens daily. But again, I say it is really nice to be part of happy experiences and events these days. So, being able to offer it, because we're not what people sometimes expect. We're not living high society, reclining, eating bonbons all day.
Yeah.
We're the ones that are, picking up trash on the way into the hotel, or people are taking selfies of themselves and we say, "Oh, would you like us to help you and take a picture for you?" And then we introduce ourselves and they say, "Oh my gosh, but you're just walking around." And we're like, "Yeah, we walk around and do things and we fix things." And so it's nice surprising people with kind of how granular we are here on a daily basis too.
As you're talking, I'm almost wondering, like, where did for you the drive to continue the lodge come in? How do you define the legacy that you're helping to preserve? Is maybe the question I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, it's, I'm just backing it up a little bit. You talked about the, sort of being a little bit in the public space, a little bit public, sort of public property with a last name that commands attention. And, the neat thing about it is The Sound of Music is such a positive story. So we have the opportunity through often a fairly, even just a brief interaction with someone, to give them something that you can tell really means a lot to them, and that often we know they are going out, they're telling all their family and friends about. And so that opportunity to walk around and make people happy over the course of the day, it's a really neat position to be in. And then it happens to tie into what we do here because we're in hospitality. So we grew up programmed to make people happy. That was our job. We were in hospitality. The guest is always right. It was just natural, I think, that we were always drawn to this place. It was also our home. So we were attached to this land. We were attached to these buildings, these trees, these rocks, these amazing trails that we grew up cross-country skiing on together. So it was just sort of a no-brainer that we would be here. And, there was always sort of an expectation that the family would continue to operate this business. So, and now we're starting to see that with younger generations starting to work here as well. And it'll be really interesting to see what that brings in the future.
Sam, you put that really well. And I think it also goes back to our motto. I love that we talk about our motto being a little of Austria, a lot of Vermont. The Austrian tradition is really, take care of the land, take care of the people. And when you talk about the legacy to preserve, I think it's how are we going to continue with that, with now that we have 2,600 acres. So we have a big, like Sam was saying, a big trail system with cross-country skiing and snowshoeing in the winter, in the summer, mountain biking and hiking and trail running. So it's how we develop our property is along the lines of Austrian traditions, and then also what can we do here in Vermont. And being outside in nature is really important to both Sam and me to be able to kind of regroup and regenerate. I'm sitting in my screened-in porch right now outside with the wind, and we just have this amazing property up here.
that leads, I think, into maybe let's talk a little bit about your current roles, but also maybe how you decided to land where you are and what it was like to grow up running the business, and maybe those experiences that shaped where you wanted to see it once it was sort of under your ownership, if that's the right way to phrase that.
Yeah, we both worked here as kids. We started working hourly, 25 cents an hour when I think I was 8 and you were 10, Kristina. And so right off the bat, we were taught a pretty solid work ethic as far as the impact that we could have. And as I mentioned earlier, just growing up in hospitality, you wanted to make people happy. So I think it was really ingrained in us, and that we both ended up working as ski instructors in some pretty amazing places in the world. And it was so natural for us to make people happy. And to the point that now sometimes you wonder, you see something like, why did that person miss that opportunity to make that guest so happy? It just comes so naturally to us from growing up in this business. So the guest facing part of our jobs is really huge, because with our parents being pretty much retired, they're still around and they're still very gracious when they do interact with guests, but there's no expectation that they have to, do these various events. So it's primarily Kristina and me are the primary Von Trapps on property. And that's a short list. So we put a lot of our energy does go into guest facing interactions, because there's not anyone else who can do that as Von Trapps. So we're involved in a lot of different aspects of the operation. I'm responsible for the brewery operations, the outdoor recreation, farming and agriculture, or farming and forestry, and do a lot with the history tours, with various other tours. We lead other tours as well. So just within the past month, we have both led Meet the Cows tours when we didn't, our team members weren't available. One had a knee replacement, one was on vacation. I've led some brewery tours in that time period as well. So it's nice being able to be hands-on, and then ideally being able to delegate a lot of the other aspects of it to people who have more time for it. And we have a great situation with Kristina's husband, who fills a really critical role in our organization, because with him, you have the benefit of a family member who isn't a Von Trapp. So he has the commitment to the property, and he lives right here, and he's 100% dedicated to what we do, but he's not getting pulled aside constantly being a Von Trapp. So it allows him to get more done in a day.
Yeah, so so the three of us are in leadership now. So my husband Walter Frame, and myself and Sam are all in leadership positions. And when people ask what my job title is, I'm like, well, anything from chief trash picker-upper to executive vice president, depending on the day.
I've never obviously owned and operated an inn or a lodge. However, I worked in the hospitality industry. I had an event planning company for many years. And so just to see that small piece of the industry and venues, I worked in venue management and all the things. It's a lot of work behind the scenes. And so I really commend you, because on the scale that you are operating things is a tremendous effort. And especially to be so willingly involved in the nitty gritty, because they are not glamorous jobs, a lot of those tasks. You did bring something up that reminded me, and I'm sorry to bounce around quite this way, but your parents, family moved here. Did your grandparents start the lodge for the public? Or what, like, who started it? Who made it public? It was a family home, and then it opened as a lodge. So where did that fit in? How did that happen?
Good question. So the family moved here in 1942, our dad's family. Sam, what was he, 3 years old? And there was an existing building, and then they added on to it so that there were enough rooms for everybody. But then they would travel and sing fall, winter, and spring, and then live here in the summer and grow their own food and keep working the farm. It was a working dairy farm initially, and then they realized how much work dairy farms are, and then did change over to beef cattle. But when they would travel and sing, they were telling people what a beautiful place they had in Stowe, Vermont, and it reminded them of Austria, and people must come visit them. So when people came to stay initially, it was very casual. A few things happened. The play came out in 1959. And so there was more notoriety around their name. And then the movie in 1965. But going back to the 50s, Stowe was also one of the first 3 downhill ski resorts in North America. So winter of 40-41, a chairlift went in at Stowe Mountain Resort, downhill skiing started gaining popularity and people were needing places to stay. So it wasn't just that people were coming to see the Trapp Family Lodge and the Von Trapps, people were also coming to downhill ski, and Stowe was becoming more of a resort. We really talk about 1950 as taking reservations and money in exchange for overnights, as opposed to just people coming and staying casually like they come and stay with you at your house. And Sam, you may have some other information to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think that was really good. And even within our family, as can be the case, it's sort of like the family sort of decided, okay, when did we become a hotel? And they sort of said, yeah, I think it was 1950. So it's one of those things that evolves. And now you look back on it, of course, this was meant to be a hotel. But, our grandmother's feeling was this place was so special that it just needed to be shared with other people. And again, they had great foresight in buying this hilltop farm. So the reason they got such a good deal on this property is it was at the top of a hill. It was difficult to get up and down the hill, and the soils were terrible. Vermont, as a general rule, doesn't have very good soil to start with. Just we had, the last ice age, roughly 12,000 years ago, scraped all of our topsoil away. We've only been rebuilding it for 12,000 years. And so the good farms were down low on the floodplain, and the hilltop farms were not profitable at all. But they had this vision of what the value. Sorry, I'm looking out the window as I say this because we have this magnificent view here. And so they recognized how special this place would be down the line. And so we really have to thank our grandparents and our father for recognizing, for buying this land initially, but also our father for having the foresight to identify adjacent landowners, buy up as much of the land as he could back in the late 60s and early 70s in order to make sure that we would have all this opportunity. So it's great that now when friends of mine who worked here came to me 16, 17 years ago and suggested that we create a disc golf course. And once they got me convinced, we were able to do it. It's so nice to be in a position of having the land and being able to do that. We wouldn't be able to do that if it hadn't been for the foresight of our father and grandparents.
Are you finding that your area, because of course now Stowe is incredibly well known and has, I'm sure, its pockets of hyper tourism, are you finding that land is harder to come by and that's more of a valuable commodity?
Land is essential to preserve and to maintain as open spaces or farms. Mm-hmm. And we have a very strong land trust, Stowe Land Trust organization, and also Vermont Land Trust. And we have preserved 1,500 acres up on the hillside that we have agreed to not build on, but we can recreate on. That's great. Yeah, which is wonderful. We still have a whole agricultural component to our property also. And because, especially this year, we get a lot of rain, that we realize that if we don't graze our pastures, they will grow up into forests very quickly. So we rotate graze our cattle through 7 or 8 different pastures around our property. We always say it's a toss-up. If people come to our property, they're like, where's a Von Trapp and where are the cows? Which one do I get to see first? Our cows are really distinctive. They're Scottish Highland cattle, so they all have horns and they grow an extra layer of hair in the wintertime like horses do. So they're really distinctive and really neat to see. So preserving the land and in our area is forefront of our minds. And what people have done in Stowe is to put together organizations that will buy a farm and then help keep it running as a farm and to keep it viable.
And it's funny you mentioned, which one can I see first? It sounds like depending on the day and whose knee's getting replaced, you might get both in one tour.
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. I actually led the Meet the Cows tour the other day, and I had my name tag on, said Kristina, not Kristina Von Trapp. So I said, I'm showing up to lead your cow tour as Kristina, your cow tour leader. When I finish the history tour later today, I'll be Kristina Von Trapp, member of the family.
and that is one of the things whenever we do lead a tour, speak with a group, we usually let them know, look, I'm here to talk to you about our brewery or about our cattle, but, Sound of Music questions are also fair game, or family history questions are also fair game, because of course, even if I'm, giving a brewery tour, people are generally curious. So of course we weave some of that in as well. And, again, our goal is to make the guests happy. So talk about whatever they want to hear about. It might be a brewery tour, but if they have more questions about the family history, then we're going to answer all of those questions as well. And I would just say, you put it really well about Stowe being such a successful tourism town right now. And it is nice. One of the luxuries of that success is the ability to protect some of this land. So some communities, it would be more difficult to do that. You can't just go and, tell that farmer, hey, don't develop your farm. They're looking at taxes where, if they try to pass it to the next generation, perhaps the tax burden is too challenging. So it's nice to have an organization that says, look, we're not going to tell people they can't develop. We're going to say, hey, we would like to buy those development rights to make sure that this land is protected. So that way the landowner is also sort of reimbursed for the value that they had. But it has made a massive difference in Stowe. And we notice it when we go to towns that don't have strict zoning. Now, granted, when you're trying to get something done in a town like Stowe, then it's going to be difficult. There are going to be a lot of hoops to jump through. But then you go to a town that doesn't have strict zoning, you just sort of say, wow, it just feels very different. And our father was always a conservationist. So he has a master's degree in forest ecology. He's always loved the land. So he was an early conservationist before it was sort of a hip thing. Now sort of everybody's doing it. And he was part of the early movement to get rid of billboards in Vermont.
Wow.
And Trapp Family Lodge took a strong position on it. And it's funny because I got the full story on it recently. He had a second agenda there. He was actually responsible for maintaining Trapp Family Lodge's billboards, which were quite run down. So he was able to say, hey, we're gonna remove our billboards to show our solidarity with this, which was something he wanted to do, but also meant he no longer had to maintain them.
Two birds, one stone.
And yep, and it got some great attention for that. But it's neat that our father was on the forefront of that again when it wasn't in vogue.
I'd like to talk a little bit about, of course, the lodge as it is, but also I don't know what parts are newer, what parts you're continuing. I know you have the farm. I know you have the brewery. Have those always been?
Yeah.
Have you started some of those experiences, or what's the evolution? Maybe I should say is probably the better way.
Maybe we could do a quick timeline. So started as a hotel in 1950. Our father added cross-country skiing in 1968. That was a really big step. He's officially recognized by the International Ski History Association with creating the first full-service cross-country center in the United States in 1968. Then the hotel burnt down in 1980. That was a massive setback. We had to rebuild the hotel. We also added more development at that point, so the property got a bit bigger. The farming had come in basically, as my sister said, to keep the fields from growing up so much, and because these Scottish Highland cattle were beautiful to look at. But we started taking the farming more seriously, really sort of going back to maybe 2007 or so, when I returned to the business and local agriculture was in vogue. And I said, hey, why don't we do something more with the cattle? And let's use the cattle more in our restaurants. Mountain biking came in 2009. The brewery in 2010, the new cutting edge brewery in 2015, and then the beer hall restaurant attached to the brewery in 2016 that really changed everything, created this amazing experience, which is really special and has really added to the offerings on the property. Now people who come up for a few days, they often aren't even leaving the property because they have the option of so many different experiences that they can have here. What did I leave out of the timeline, Trappy?
No, I think you did a great job, Sam. So I would say though, our brewery and beer hall restaurant is about a mile from the hotel. So people get to either walk or snowshoe or cross-country ski to these different locations, which is kind of nice. So somebody might have a rehearsal dinner in one spot and then their wedding in a different spot, and it feels like a different location. So like Sam said, people can come here and not leave for a week because they can go experience other locations here in restaurants.
I sometimes went 2 weeks without leaving our hill. I remember realizing it wasn't good for my mental health. But before I had kids going to school and had to, drive them into town, I realized that once I had never really gone more than a mile in either direction away from the hotel. Other than getting out on the trails, I would be out on the trails, out cross country skiing. But it is a really all-encompassing experience.
Well, it really sounds kind of like, you've created such a sanctuary there. When people don't feel the need to go anywhere else, that's really speaks to what you're providing too. So kudos there.
One thing that I did forget to mention as we sort of went through the evolution of things, the tours. We always had some tours, but wouldn't you say, Kristina, that we have significantly more tours now with significantly higher levels of participation? Meet the cows, meet the sheep, walking to the sugar house. We do make our own maple syrup right here on the property. That's something that fascinated our family from the very first year here, which has continued to be part of our tradition. But the history tours have become a massive part of what we do. And on a really busy day during fall foliage, Kristina, what we could have hundreds of people participate. We could easily have 300 people participate in history tours in one day during prime foliage.
Yep, absolutely. And there's the maple sugar tour. We also have a chapel up behind the hotel. You can hike up to the chapel with a guide and learn how it was built after World War II. There's so many different things to do. Or you can also sit in one of our living rooms in front of the fireplace and read a book all day. There's a lot of different ways to experience our property.
That's really fun. And I do want to ask about fall in a minute, because we are, crazy to believe, coming up on autumn. But I would like to hear first a little bit more about the farm and the brewery. Is your beer sold exclusively on site? Are you distributing that? What is happening there?
Yeah, so we started with the brewery. Our father really wanted to replicate the crisp, clean lagers that he would have when he went back to Austria. I was trying to get him to try more craft beers, and he was wondering why lagers were so underrepresented. So 2010, we started our first brewery, and it was really, the goal was just to sell it right here on the property. If we had a few extra kegs available, we sold them through a distributor here in Vermont. Then when we built the new facility, we had gotten a lot of requests from outside of Vermont from people wanting to carry it. So we built a new cutting edge facility, and now we actually are distributing in 17 different states. So you can find our beer pretty much from North Carolina north. The only place it's not available would be Delaware and Washington, D.C. In that area. And then also Oregon, Colorado, the greater Detroit area, Tennessee, and Florida. So that has become a big part of what we do. We go on the road to promote the beer. Kristina and I both travel. This past May, we were both in Florida, but in different areas. So she was able to cover Tampa and that big area. I was able to cover Orlando. So it's neat too, because it gets us out on the road and seeing other parts of the United States and connecting with people as well. So, it used to be, our dad said at the beginning, first the hotel will sell the beer, and then the beer will sell the hotel. And sure enough, now we get people. I had someone proudly tell me at the breakfast buffet a few months back, he said, "I just want you to know I am not here because of the Sound of Music." And I said, "Okay, point taken." And he said, "I am here because of your brewery." And it was just great to hear that, that our father's vision had worked. So yeah, so the beer has become a big part of the experience. And also I think it makes us more relevant and hipper with a younger crowd. I think the fact that the Sound of Music is sort of rated G, our family had a history of being sort of quite traditional and quite sort of proper. And I think that having a brewery has allowed us to be, a little bit more human. And God forbid, I even wear a ball cap in the brewery, whereas, in our restaurants in the hotel, I generally would not wear a hat. So we get to be a little more relaxed and less traditional with the brewery.
That's great.
And then what doesn't hurt, I should just add, first of all, we have an amazing source of spring water on the property. So we don't have to take anything out of the water. We don't put anything back in. That is huge. A lot of the best breweries, most famous breweries in the world are famous for their water source. Breweries like Pilsner Urquell in the Czech Republic, Guinness. Our water actually has a very similar mineral profile to the water in Pilsen in the Czech Republic. Just going back to the agriculture, which you asked about as well. So it started that we had the herd of cattle, and that was just natural. We always had gardens here. It was always a natural place to garden, and our aunts used to do a lot of the work in those as well. But yeah, the herd of cattle is significant. Last year we harvested, I believe, 19 head for use in our restaurants. Our Johannesburger is named after our father, made from our grass-fed beef. Our father was a believer in grass-fed beef for decades before it became en vogue. But yeah, now we also have laying hens providing fresh eggs for the property. Still have the vegetable gardens, the maple syrup from right here. We put the pigs on hold during the pandemic. We stopped raising pigs and built some villas where they had been living. So now we got to find the right time to bring the pigs back in. But we also have a large flock of sheep, which I say large, we've put them all together. Often we'll have them in two separate flocks that we move around the property, grazing some of the sort of uneven ground that, again, means that we don't have to be out there brush hogging it, mowing it with a tractor, but unbelievably popular with the guests. When we read our guest response surveys, when you watch the way the guests are behaved, there will almost always be someone standing there looking at the sheep. And in an evening, often there might be 20 or 30 people lined up along the fence line. just looking at the cows and admiring them. And it's really nice to be able to connect people with these animals. And so many people are disconnected from agriculture these days, don't really understand where these things come from. So it's really neat to be able to teach them more about it.
It's really neat. And it sounds, it's interesting. Was your dad's passion for all of this, did that trickle down from his parents? Or was that sort of just something that just kind of was innate in him and that he just kind of grew up learning more and more?
As I recall, they had lost all their money in the Great Depression before they fled Austria. We didn't talk about that. They had let all of their staff go. They were bunking in rooms together and taking in boarders, and starting to grow their own food. So they already were, kind of working the land before they came to Vermont.
Okay.
And they had been told, I actually have a menu from 1968 that our grandmother wrote a little blurb on the inside, and it said, in 1929, a Swiss doctor told us that he was concerned about the amount of pesticides being put on vegetables, and that if we could, we should grow our own vegetables. So, I mean, this was from 1929, that food and clean food was on their radar. And when we were kids, the gardens grew all the vegetables for the hotel. Now, the hotel had 25 rooms, but we grew all our own food, and we've been composting for forever because we have the land to do it on, and we understand how the nutrients can get used again in our gardens, vegetable gardens or flower gardens. Yeah, it's pretty amazing, kind of the vision that they had that people are now realizing is a good way to take care of the environment and your body.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing I would add too, with our grandfather having experienced a lot of active duty with World War I, and then with our uncles, one of the neatest parts of the family history that most people don't know is that the two boys portrayed in the musical as Friedrich and Kurt, they actually were drafted into the U.S. Army during World War II, and they went back over and fought in the mountains of Italy and up into Austria with the U.S. 10th Mountain Division, our first winter warfare troops or mountain warfare troops, which were actually created and trained during World War II. And it's pretty common for veterans of active duty to want to do something nurturing after seeing the tough experiences that they had seen. So particularly for our grandfather and for our Uncle Werner, who was a lifetime farmer after he retired from singing, I think that wanting to have their hands in the soil and nurture after their experiences of war was a big motivating factor as well.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that, going back to even your resort being kind of a sanctuary, I hope more people start talking about nature as a tool for healing, to have a space where people can go like you do, and to connect them to nature, not just to stare at nature, because we have those spaces too, right? But to be a part of their environment, which you seem to offer in countless ways, is very, very special. And I think, like you just mentioned, I think you're kind of creating like a full circle experience there a bit. It also makes me wonder, as far, if we are going to talk a little bit about autumn, it also, before I want to hear all about that, because, and kind of what the autumn experience is at the Trapp Family Lodge, but also one of you touched on this earlier, it might've been you, Sam, but people are coming for different reasons, right? So like now you have you have the brewery, which you've seen now, people are coming exclusively for the brewery. I'm sure you're getting people who are coming because it's a part of sort of pop culture, if you will. How do you, what does that experience look like at check-in when people are coming for just like so many different reasons?
It's actually quite fascinating, the variety of clientele that we have.
I have to imagine.
Sam, when I finished the history tour yesterday, was it? There was a 6-year-old girl that was so starstruck. She like couldn't even talk. And her parents were like, she's just really amazed that you're here. And this is a 6-year-old girl who was and she was just like huge eyes. You could see her brain just going a million miles an hour, but she just like couldn't even say anything. She was so amazed by it. And then in fall, so right now we have a lot of families because kids are out of school. And during fall, we have people that are visiting here that don't have kids in school, so very few families. And then we also have weddings, we have newlyweds, we have, and honeymooners, and we have family reunions, and it's just amazing. So our property really needs to appeal to the whole gamut, and everybody experiences it and enjoys it in their own way, which is pretty incredible. Like there's not just one narrow avenue of people that we appeal to.
I have to imagine it's fun to have something so varied.
Yeah, I was laughing when you asked that question about sort of all the different offerings that we have here and the connection with nature, because just this morning at our sort of senior leadership meeting within the hotel, we were talking about the check-in process for guests and the balance between trying to not take too long to check them in, because sometimes it's a busy Friday and you've got a lot of people arriving, but also how to give them all the information. Because if you actually took the time to educate every guest on what we have, it would take 10 minutes for each check-in. We're very fortunate to have so many things that we can offer here. And I got to think about when you talked about the connection with nature, over time, the sound of music, there will come a time when not as many people will be familiar with the sound of music. I think we would have to wait quite a while before it'll be forgotten completely. It's quite powerful. But, I think that there can be sort of a transition of more of a focus on nature, maybe not quite as large a percentage of it is about the sound of music, and more of it is about that connection with nature. And I see an opportunity for us when people arrive fascinated with our history to satisfy their interest in the history, but also take advantage of having them as a captive audience to try to share that message of connection with nature and the importance. So when you talk, Allie, about, the therapy of nature, it's another one of the things that helps us sleep well at night, is knowing that every year we are connecting countless people with a very healthy and very sustainable, long-term sustainable, healthy lifestyle that is not superficial, is not materialistic, where people can feel fulfilled and content without needing to go out and buy something to achieve that.
Sam, that's really nice. And I think I totally agree. Somebody said to me once that land can have charisma.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
our hillside has its own charisma. We see the sunrise over the Worcester Range. We get the sunrise first thing in the morning. The sun sets in the west and casts an amazing glow on the mountains. We have fields, we have forests, we have ponds, so we get a variety of birds. We also do a bird watching
How fun.
tour. So we wake up to the birds and we go to bed with the frogs. But there just is a peacefulness on our property that really resonates with people. And you say sanctuary, other people have also used the word retreat.
Yep.
Just is it's rejuvenating, if you allow it to be, and it is amazing up here.
When you mention retreat, Kristina, it reminds me of yoga. The fact that this time of year, our yoga classes take place, weather allowing, outdoors on a concert stage. So on Sunday night, you have the Vermont Symphony Orchestra performing on that stage, and Monday morning at 8:30, you've got a bunch of people out doing yoga.
Good use of space too.
And a good use of space. Yes,
That's great.
absolutely.
And then a wedding on Saturday night.
Yes, wedding on
that's
Saturday.
Right. Weddings and events. Yeah.
And then when it does rain, it often is followed by amazing rainbows. So here we were yesterday doing an amazing event, and then afterward, I guess it's kind of hard to see, but afterward, here we were worried that the rain was going to ruin the event, and instead it ended up with this legendary rainbow that turned into a double, and it was like, okay, it was all meant to be. We were supposed to experience that rainstorm in order to be able to enjoy the rainbow at the end.
Wow. Probably no time more photogenic than autumn, when the leaves are changing and you're on the hillside. So could you briefly talk us through that experience, or what folks could look forward to? I know you mentioned the maple tapping, which is very fun, festive, right? So what if people are looking to come out, what's happening at the lodge?
Our property is, well, first of all, it's really fun. Fall foliage is spectacular. It is so beautiful here. And I think it's unique in Vermont because the hillsides are a little bit closer than they are, say, in Colorado, when you get the really immense, grand awe-inspiring experience with the big mountains in Colorado where Sam and I lived, and we love it out there. But here in Vermont, it's a little more intimate, and around every corner, there's a little bit of a different view. And every year, I mean, we experience fall every year, and every year I think, oh yeah, it's okay. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, look at that tree. And I, who live here all the time, I will take pictures. And I'll say, oh my gosh, I can't believe this, but I'm taking pictures. And so it's just a little more intimate and close. And yeah, you don't have to stay at our hotel to experience our property. You can come and pay a day pass. Even going out on the trails is amazing, and it smells a little bit different also because the leaves are dropping on the ground, and you always pick up a couple leaves to bring back to your house and experience the color in your own house or in your car for a little bit until the leaf dries up. But it smells great, it looks great, and you can see the colors changing every day.
And it's funny, Kristina, because you mentioned how sort of sometimes we sort of forget to enjoy it or all of a sudden find ourselves enjoying it. Because for us, if you ask us about fall foliage, typically we're going to start thinking about how busy we are and just, okay, what do we have to do? Big to-do lists, gotta cover this, gotta cover that. So yeah, I often forget. I'll be halfway through foliage when I suddenly stop and say, hey, let's just take a moment and appreciate how gorgeous that is, because we do take it for granted a little bit. But part of what makes it so special is these sugar maples. So these maple trees are the ones that create the most vibrant colors. And, there are a lot of places in the country that do have foliage. And I think that the reason that Vermont's foliage is so famous is because of the vibrancy of the colors. It's the reds, the oranges, and the yellows, whereas a lot of parts of the country, it's just sort of more yellows or a little bit of reds. But these sugar maples particularly have such vibrant colors. And so if you're out walking, sometimes you walk under one tree that's really red and the whole ground is just carpeted with red leaves. And then just a few feet further, it's all yellow. And then a few feet further, it's all orange. And just, you're right there on those leaves. So as Kristina said, it's in this closer environment where you're sort of interacting with it more as opposed to looking across a valley at a beautiful mountain that's miles away. There's a reason why Vermont is so coveted that time of year. And so typically the fall foliage will start in late September, and then it goes through mid to late October. And every year is going to be a little bit different. And there's always a lot of talk. What do you think foliage is going to be like this year? What do you think the rain this year is going to do to the foliage or the lack of rain? Generally speaking, yes, someone coming, say, the 20th of October, you can be here after sort of the crushing crowds, but still enjoy foliage. And it's just a different stage of it. But once you get to that early November, then you're into the season that Noah Kahan has now made famous with his song, Stick Season. And stick season's fun too, because now you can see into the woods again. Say, oh, I forgot about that beautiful rock there. It's been obscured by foliage for the last 5-6 months. And now, boom, we can see it again. So I just love the cycle of the seasons in Vermont as well. It was so fun for me when I first moved back to just sort of stay here. I didn't want to leave the state. I just wanted to stay here and watch the flow from each micro season into each micro season. It's not just, winter, spring, summer, fall. The color of the leaves in early summer is very different than the color of the leaves in late summer. And from week to week, constant shifting.
It sounds beautiful.
My dad and I like the term prime foliage. People will sometimes talk about peak foliage, but the problem is then it's as if you aren't there at 3:43 p.m. on the 7th of October, you missed it. So we prefer prime foliage. It's sort of last week of September, sort of through the 20th or more of October. And you don't have to be competing with everyone for peak or people trying to move on. Oh, I want to see it in Maine when it's at its peak, and I want to see it in New Hampshire when it's at its peak. And then you're just going to be wrestling with other crowds. So, enjoy it at whatever time you're here. And as Kristina said, pick up a leaf, take it home. Don't peel the bark off our birch trees, please, but feel free to pick a leaf off the ground.
What is it that you hope folks take away from their visit?
I would say that they just remember to slow down and be present. There's so much, like we've been talking about being outside, there's so much to experience. And if you're hustling and hustling and hustling, then you're constantly thinking ahead and you're not present and enjoying the moment. And we have so much to offer in the moment here.
Yeah, I really like that, Kristina. And yeah, I would say connection with nature. That ideally our guests leave here extra motivated to appreciate nature, and not just passively, but also recreating in nature, which is so great because then it touches on everything. You're getting your physical, your mental, your spiritual. Just being able to help inspire people to that sort of, as you said, Kristina, that more present and healthier and really sustainable lifestyle.
Wonderful. Well, I will make sure that in the show notes for the episode, we share links not only to the lodge so folks can make reservations, but also to your beer.
What I meant to be saying as well was the number of medals that we've won. We've won some very prestigious medals for our beers, and pretty much all of them of our year-round beers and our seasonals, they've all won medals. But our Dunkel, our dark lager, was named best dark lager in the world about a year and a half ago at the World Beer Awards. So yes, and we're not going to claim that it's the best in the world. That would be a very bold statement. But it is nice when a panel of trained judges say that. It is very nice to hear.
That's quite the accomplishment. Congratulations. And
Yeah.
is your beer with your last name?
Yeah, so it's Von Trapp Brewing.
Von Trapp, easy to find. Perfect.
Yes, yeah.
When going back to talking about the legacy, what's our legacy to preserve? And I was talking about the motto, a little of Austria, a lot of Vermont. There's also another German word, Gemütlichkeit. And it's the Germans love to put lots of consonants together and create one word that means a lot of things. And Gemütlichkeit means professional, but comfortable, not pretentious atmosphere and hospitality. And so it's that Gemütlichkeit that we want to keep passing down through the culture of our property.
When a new person comes in, they all learn the word Gemütlichkeit. And I usually define it as sort of cozy, welcoming. You can't use just one word to translate it, but yes, it's that sort of comfortable hospitality, not pretentious. And yeah, so often it's what we come back to. If we're trying to make a choice on something, well, is that gemütlich? If it's not gemütlich, then maybe we want to go a different direction with it.
Based on what we've talked about, that there's that embodiment of wanting people to feel at home and that you're sharing your space with them. So I appreciate that very, very much. I appreciate you for taking the time today. And I'm sure folks who are visiting also appreciate your time, because it's really special that they get to go and not just experience the space and your land and everything that you've created for them, but that they get to experience interactions with you as well. Like I said, I'll put everything in the show notes for folks so that they can access it. But I just thank you for your time.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Allie.
Thanks so much. Thanks for letting us share what we're so excited about here.